Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Throughout time, humans have aided in the shaping of history, but
history can be subjective.
From time to time, our accounts of history don't always match. So,
this is history through my eyes.
Well, we discovered that America had declared war on Japan on not December 7th, which is the date that everybody has in the Western world, but obviously in China we were a day later. So to me, the war began, or America entered the war on December 8th. And we learned of it from a shortwave radio that we had hidden in our linen cabinet. So when I went to school that morning, a lot of people didn't even know about it because not everybody had a shortwave radio, and it had not yet come out in the morning papers. Well, I came from a very privileged class, and that's not to be bragging or anything, but China was a very classed society. So there was the rich and there were the poor, and we came from the privileged classes. We had many pieces of property, we had a lot of houses, and we lived in really great luxury. Well, I think the interesting part about my background is that my adoptive mother was American. That's why I was brought up biculturally with both English and Chinese. She met my father when he was a student at Harvard, and when they came back to China, unfortunately, they were not able to have children, so I was an adoptive child, and I was adopted in the traditional Chinese way, not adopting from a stranger. The privileged classes always adopted from within their own family, so that not only they were assured that their own bloodline would be carried on, but they were also assured that their property would not pass on to a stranger. Well, the Japanese had been trying to make incursions into China for some years, but it was in 1937 that they actually started full-scale the Sino-Japanese War. They marched into Nanking, and everybody knows about the rape of Nanking, which was a big massacre of maybe 250,000 people. But in Peking, which was my home, they walked in totally, they just walked in, not a shot was fired. They came in with the bugles blaring and trumpets going and marching without a shot being fired. And I was told by an American officer who was a Japan specialist that the Japanese military had been told not to do any damage in Peking because it was such a historical city that if they did do any damage, that it would really cause international furor. So that was the story of the Sino-Japanese War. But it wasn't until America entered the war in '41 that we really started having some problems. So it was announced by our school principal, and she told everybody that America had entered the war. Of course, it was really, everybody was stunned because most of us didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. We never even heard of it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, she told everybody to go on home, and she would keep us informed on what would happen with the school, but she was quite sure that the Japanese would close it down because it was an American school. So she kept a handful of us seniors there, and we copied all the records of the high school students so that everybody would have their records. And so the few of us who stayed to do the copying were, we must have been there for an extra couple of hours. And by the time we left, the gates of the school had already been closed and Japanese sentries were already standing there. So that they had moved in very fast to close the school down. So after that, our principal was determined that at least the seniors, which I was at that time, I was 16, at least we would have our high school diplomas. So we continued our classes underground. We had classes for 1 week in one person's home, at which time they'd announced next week we'll be in another person's home. And all Americans were not allowed to gather in groups of more than 3. They all had red armbands. They were all required to have armbands with the character for America on the band so that people could identify them wherever they were. So we continued with our schooling, and we did get our degrees. For me, it was very hard. I lost all my American friends because having been to an American high school, most of my friends were American. And then I had to adjust to going to Chinese school. How on earth I got into Chinese college, I can't imagine, because I had to take entrance exams to get into Chinese college. Originally, I had been scheduled to come to America for college. I'd taken my college boards in my junior year and had passed them. In those days, we called them college boards. They're now what they call the SATs. So I had taken those in my junior year and already been accepted to Smith College in America. But of course, with the war, I couldn't go. So then I had to go to Chinese college. And as I said, I took the exam for Chinese college, but having been in American high school, my Chinese was not that great. But somehow I got in, and then I had to adjust to being without all my American friends. So it was kind of it was an adjustment for me. Even after America entered the war, the Japanese were really very lax for the first week or so, but the underground classes were fairly easy because you have to remember the American school that I went to was very small. And our senior class, for instance, had only 13 people in it originally, but several of them had already gone to the interior of China when the Japanese occupied. So we were down to maybe 7 or 8 students, so it wasn't that big a deal. We just went to different people's houses. All the diplomats in the American embassy were confined, and all the missionaries, which there were a lot of American missionaries in Peking, they were all confined to the missionary compounds, but they could always get passes. And the Japanese would let them go out for this or that or whatever they wanted to do. But that only lasted for about a week. The Americans in the embassy were repatriated within about 6 months after America declared war. So they went back to America on a Swedish ship, recruited by the by the International Red Cross. And about maybe 6 months after that, no, sorry, I need to backtrack. The American diplomats were repatriated, and also those of the missionaries that wanted to leave. So many of them left, but a lot of them stayed, and those that stayed, within a few months, they were all herded together and packed off to concentration camp. And that was really a sad thing to see, because they had all made these, what they call cheerful Charlies, a little cart with 2 wheels that they could push their suitcases on. But I remember it was so sad watching them go, because they had all got their luggage piled onto these little cheerful Charlies, but the Japanese soldiers came and demanded that they take them off and grab these little carts away from them, and they were each only allowed to take whatever they could actually carry in their hands, which was a small suitcase or whatever, and then the things they had actually packed to go with the little carts they were forced to leave behind. And the Japanese soldiers just pushed and prodded them. It was very sad to see. So, and that was the exodus of the Americans. And this made it very, very sad for my mother, because she was exempted from going to concentration camp because she had minor Chinese children. That's me and my younger sister. But the exemption, it was supposed to be an act of compassion, but in actual fact, it was much harder on her than on the ones that had to go to concentration camp, because they were again repatriated from the concentration camps in an exchange program, and they were repatriated in about 7 months after they were taken there. So they really had to only endure 7 months of hardship, whereas my mother had to endure the whole war. And during that time, the Japanese gendarmes came knocking at the door at all hours, dragging her off to the gendarmerie for interrogation. I don't know what they expected to get from her, but they were very rough, and it was very hard on her. I suspect that at the beginning she was probably very relieved that she didn't have to go. But as the war wore on, I don't know. We didn't know until after the war ended that the people in concentration camp had been repatriated. Not all of them were repatriated. I don't know how these things work, but it was an exchange in exchange for releasing Japanese prisoners. They released American ones. So I don't know what proportion of them were actually repatriated. But we didn't know about that during the war, so we were thinking all the time it was quite a blessing that she had been exempted.
Well, hello and welcome. My name is Brad Hibbs, the wellness manager here at Green Spring Village, and what I'd like to do is real quick go over what we include here in the fitness center, what kinds of equipment, etc. we have here. We're located in Town Center, both the fitness center and the aquatic center. And it's very, very simple to get involved here. It's just a matter of filling out a form. We sometimes have the physicians give a clearance on that, but we'll set up an orientation for you, a #1 appointment. It is 24/7. It is free. We'd like to encourage you to come down. We have a wide range of equipment here. We have cardiovascular machines, we have new steps, we have treadmills, we have a stair stepper, we have a couple of recumbent machines, but we have staff here that is qualified and trained to help you get started here. But please give us a call or stop down, and we'd love to talk to you about what we offer.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Ajewa. I am one of the CR coordinators. One of the many ways in finding out what is going on here at Green Spring is by looking at the bulletin board. The bulletin board has all the events and activities that goes on campus on a daily basis on them. And what normally happens is I get the flyers, I approve them, and then they are placed on the bulletin board by our bulletin board committee members. So go and check the bulletin board up and see all the activities and events available to you.
I say children, I was 16 when it started, but I was still leading quite a decent life. But for my mother, who was having to feed us, there were 5 of us in the family at that time, we were really, she had to worry about where our next meal was coming from. So, and I think that I think I told you before that her weight, which was normally 130 pounds, by the end of the war she weighed 86 pounds. So through it all, she was so stoic. We had several properties, and we had moved into one of the properties that was the most convenient location-wise. And we were there, I think it was on a Christmas night, when our old family retainer, who had been occupying one of our other properties, actually our main home, he came, and he was all bandaged because the Japanese soldiers had really hit him with the butt of their gun, and they had confiscated our family home. And we were never allowed to go back there to get our clothing or anything. So, and we were stuck in this other house, which was still a large house. And there we were forced to take a Japanese tenant. I don't know who forced it, but the Japanese occupying forces must have told my mother, you have to have this Japanese in your house. And we also were forced to take a German. And we were forced to give them the best rooms in the house. And this at first seemed like a horrible thing. We were just horrified that this was being forced upon us. But in the end, it turned out to be a blessing, because the Japanese man that we got, that was shoved upon us, turned out to be American educated. His name was Mr. Kami, and he turned out to be a good friend to us, even though, and he almost seemed guilty that he was occupying part of our house. But he gave us his ration books, so that helped us a lot. And then we were very poor at the time, because my father was with the Chinese government, which had fled to the interior of China. We were not getting money from him, and we were surviving on selling things. We sold everything we had, you know, linens, blankets, silver, china, everything. And he knew that we were having trouble, and he, both my mother and I had started teaching English to various people, mostly to students, because English as a foreign language had been cut out of all the Chinese schools. And Mr. Kami suggested that there was a Japanese man in the embassy, in the Japanese embassy, who wanted to take lessons. So we were both teaching this Japanese man, who again ended up being very helpful to us. I can't remember exactly what he gave us, but instead of paying my mother in cash for his lessons, he paid us in flour. So he'd give us 2 bags of flour for his lessons. And that was a real blessing, because we were having trouble with the rationing. As the war got more desperate for the Japanese, they were loading the rice with pebbles, and they were reducing the rations all the time. And the funny thing,
Received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government in reply to the message forwarded to that government by the Secretary of State on August 11th. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan. In the reply, there is no qualification.
when the war ended, this is the oddest thing, though. You would have thought with the end of the war, there would have been all kinds of jubilation on the streets. I cannot remember one bit of that. I remember the war ended, I believe it was in September 45, VJ Day. I think it was September. And in October, the International Red Cross came in and told all the people in North China that there was a ship which would be taking Americans back to the US, the ones that had been stuck there. It would be taking them back and leaving the port city of Tientsin in 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And they asked if my mother would like to go, and of course she immediately jumped on the chance. She'd been, enduring this hardship for 4 years. So she immediately said yes, she wanted to go, so she had 24 hours to pack. She tried to get me accepted to go also. And of course I was not American, so I was not eligible. But she went to the Red Cross with the admission papers from Smith College, not the papers, but the acknowledgement that I had been accepted and had a scholarship. She took those with her to the Red Cross and said that surely if my daughter's allowed to go, she will be admitted as a student. So the Red Cross said, okay, she can go, but if she gets to America and she's denied a student visa, she will have to return. So that was the circumstances under which I was able to come to America. My father was in the interior of China, where the Chinese government had moved. We did not know it, but he was returning to Peking and arrived back in Peking the day after we left. So we had missed him by a day. Well, this is when the Sino-Japanese War began, that was in 1937, He had gone to the interior of China with the government. This was now 1945, and we had not seen him from 37 to 45. And so it was not till 2 years later when he came to America, when I graduated from college. He came then, so it was fully 10 years from the time that we'd been separated to the time we were together. And then he stayed only a few months, and then went back to China to quote, settle his affairs. And then, of course, the communists took over. So then we did not see him for another 10 years. So really, in my life, my father was really not much a part of my life. She was a very strong woman, but when you think about it, she actually was from a blue-collar family. Her father was a tanner, tanning leather in Peabody, Massachusetts, which was a leather area where they did a lot of shoes and stuff like that. And so, and when she met my father, she was nothing. She was, just as I said, a blue-collar young woman. But she had met my father because it's all kind of convoluted, but he needed some coaching in English, and she stepped up and was teaching him English, and or improving his English.
Can you tell us why you wrote your book? Like, just why did you feel the need to write a book about everything?
Well, the first book, which was called Adopted the Chinese Way, I felt I had to write that because my children, who are so American, they're so American. They think of me as so American. It never occurred to them the kind of life that I had in my early years. I mean, being brought up in a Chinese family, we had a concubine. My grandfather's concubine lived with us. I felt they needed to know something about all that, and how even though I was adopted, I still knew my birth family, so I had two families at the same time, my adopted family and my birth family, and I felt they needed to know what my childhood was like, the games we played, the things we did, which are so different from American kids. They play cops and robbers, we played Chinese opera, things like that. So I felt that was important. One adjusts to what one has. And I have to say that it affected my life a lot, because I have always felt, nowadays they're always talking about how important it is to have a father and a mother in a family. But my mother brought us up virtually alone under very difficult circumstances. So I think that if you have one good parent, it's better than two lousy ones.
This is history through my eyes.